Hello, my name is Christopher Smith. I serve as professor and chair of musicology and director of the Vernacular Music Center here at Texas Tech University, and I'm very happy to be offering this guest lecture on behalf of the Humanities Center. My own appointment is in music history and research, and so I teach courses in American musics, vernacular musics, that is, musics which are learned, taught, and passed on by ear and in the memory, also 20th century musics, and related fields like ethnomusicology and arts practice research. Musicology entails the study of musical processes and objects in their historical contexts. Traditionally, historical musicologists primarily focused upon artworks in the European classical music tradition and the circumstances and the individuals from which those compositions arose. More recently, say since the 1970s, musicologists have expanded their areas of study and their methods to include musics from around the world, and to find ways in which their study of musical objects could expand to include the study of musical processes and behaviors. Historically, musicologists dealt with physical archives and the Western art music tradition, so-called classical music, and ethnomusicologists dealt with musical behaviors beyond the Western art music tradition. Thankfully, and more recently, those fields have merged to an extent, and both have learned to use a mixed set of tools suitable for the study of objects or processes, behaviors, contexts, and related fields. As a result, musicologists often draw upon related humanities disciplines like art history, literature, anthropology, sociology, and theater studies. In my own work, for example, which tends to focus upon vernacular performance, that is, the ways that people make music by ear and by collaborative improvisation, I often find myself drawing upon methods from kinesics, dance theory, drama theory, and anthropology. What follows are a couple of short case studies describing the kind of work that I do as a musicologist and some of the places that it leads me. For example, in a book that I published in 2019 about street dance as a revolutionary tactic in American cultural history, I wrote an extended essay about the earliest roots of hip-hop, emerging from a particular combination of historical factors, technological innovations, immigrant experience, urban planning, and the nature of roots-based street creativity. Though I'm not by training a hip-hop specialist, I have had certain experiences due to my age and my studies, which helped me put hip-hop in the mid-1970s into a wider context. For example, I was able to link the technology of the battery-powered boombox, access to acrylic spray paint in aerosol cans, the transformations in the South Bronx of New York when the Cross-Bronx Expressway cut off that neighborhood from the rest of the 5 boroughs, the influence of blaxploitation and kung fu films, and the collision of Latino and funk musics on the turntables of DJs in black neighborhoods and community centers to tell a story about how and why hip-hop emerged with the roots and the meanings that it carried in the time and place where it did. So let me begin with a bit of an autobiographical anecdote. In 1977, I was a student in the inaugural freshman year program, undergraduate, offered by the New School for Social Research in New York. Housing its small initial cadre in NYU dorms on East 10th Street, the FYP held its seminars at the New School's main campus at 66 West 12th Street. As part of my activities that year, I assisted a program colleague as a volunteer teaching literacy at a school in East Harlem 2 days a week after my own classes. We'd ride the number 6 line north from 14th Street and walk from 125th Street east to that primary school. So I first heard hip-hop, which at that time was still several years away from LP recordings, much less visibility on television, on East Harlem playgrounds, MCs toasting, DJs wiring their salvaged amplifiers into the light posts on basketball courts. Though my own musical tastes and experience were both narrow and directed elsewhere at that time, as an instrumental musician, I was immediately and lastingly struck by the sheer digital mastery of the DJs.
Rent the room. That's what we did. So this was a breath of fresh air for us, going somewhere we could hear some music. Turned out to be a success.
Herc was one of the first DJs in the Bronx to borrow a technique from Manhattan's downtown discotheques, the use of 2 turntables. This meant DJs could play music without interruption, mixing from the end of one record straight into the beginning of another. But unlike other DJs, Herc didn't play disco music. Instead, he specialized in the kind of hard-edged funk music that others ignored.
Yeah, I remember going to the Herc parties and that started in the community room, and it grew so big that we couldn't fit in the community room anymore. And music was just, it was slamming. I was trying to think.
This autobiographical experience, which long predates my scholarly engagement with street dance and hip-hop culture, as a matter of fact, in 1977, the term hip-hop was barely employed, suggests the immediacy with which this form of expression could occupy or claim or take over public spaces. In a moment in which working-class black and brown youth were largely invisible or isolated from public discourse, the continued capacity to create art in the street was an essential identity tool. The use of sonic and visual noise, that is, the archetypal oversized cassette-playing boomboxes that b-boys or break-boys shouldered on the New York subways, and the dances that took over playgrounds, sidewalks, and vacant lots, were strategies of resistance. Motion itself, especially improvisational dance, resisted authoritarian constructions of space. So b-boying, the complex of dance vocabularies that developed as part of hip-hop culture, is an essential component of that community's expressive arsenal, like emceeing or rhyming poetry, DJing, creating beats for dancers and MCs, and graffiti writing. B-boying is a competitive, improvisational, and deeply personalized art form that depends upon both individual choice, awareness of traditional practices and approaches, and a community's recognition. Its archetypal venue is the cipher, that is, a circle of participant observers, reminiscent in history of the ring shout, the kalinda, the capoeira players' circle, Mardi Gras Indian practice rings, and a range of other Afro-Caribbean performance sites. B-boys are in fact quite eloquent and articulate about what goes on within this sacred dance space. Quote, "It happens in an exchange. He's giving me something I can relate to, and I have to answer with something that he can relate to, so we can continue this battle." Improvisation fuels innovation as dancers constantly seek and develop new moves and responses to different music and competition. Now, it's important to add here that the cipher is portable. It can be created within seconds anywhere within public or private space. Given the particularly light footprint of early hip-hop as I encountered it in East Harlem, dance as an essential part of hip-hop's reclamation of public space was a crucial way for me to begin to understand that culture. The B-boys built their dance vocabularies out of the long and rich traditions of African-American dance, ransacking old videos and parallel dance styles, especially New York Puerto Rican or New Yorkican. Also, James Brown was a particular touchstone, but so were the acrobatics of swing and mambo, the footwork of capoeira and salsa and disco, the flow of 60s R&B choreographies, and the athletics of kung fu films. In fact, martial arts movies eventually became a source of urban mythography for hip-hop groups like Wu-Tang Clan. Only a few scholarly studies have specifically linked dancing and public space, though as one scholar says, quote, "To dance well to the chosen songs is to live in hip-hop history. Sound and movement, the sound of beats via battery-powered boomboxes accompanying break boys dancing, enabled claims to that contested public space." Now, authoritarian hierarchy's response to that sort of eruptive noise indexes its impact. The crackdowns on b-boying and on graffiti writers and on boomboxes and even on the sale of D-cell batteries for boomboxes indicates just how strongly hip-hop was felt to push back against authoritarianism. Revolutionary noise, in other words, in oral and visual realms, pushed back. Public noise was resisted precisely because of the middle-class anxiety it evoked, especially when that anxiety was exacerbated by racist concerns. Yet hip-hop, like reggae before it, has become an empowering symbolic system, not only in its originating communities, but to other disenfranchised communities worldwide. And that leads me to my second example, also based in work I developed for the same book, which is called Dancing Revolution, work on the hashtag Dancing is Not a Crime. Encountering this hashtag encouraged me to read widely about dance as a revolutionary tactic in a wide variety of historical moments and cultural settings, to the extent that when I saw dance arising again in the same oppositional way, I was able to link it to other moments and settings throughout history. When I saw tango dancers in the tear gas clouds at Taksim Gezi Park in Istanbul in 2014, and then again when I saw hijab-wearing young women dancing the shuffle dance in traffic intersections in Baghdad in 2020, I was able to link that movement resistance to wider connections and to recognize both the courage and the creativity required to use dance in this way. Now, I'm not a Muslim or an Arabic speaker or a woman. I'm a white cisgender male scholar. But because I've spent decades as a scholar thinking about vernacular music and dance, I've been able to see again and again that patterns from other historical and cultural moments can help us understand our present. For example, in a live video posted to YouTube in 2014, a young woman dressed in black and standing on a stationary car responds to lo-fi pop music by dancing and then unwinding her hijab and fluffing her long hair. That upload eventually registered over 1 million views and precipitated a spate of responses depicting young women dancing in public spaces, and in turn spawning a hashtag dancing is not a crime. When I encountered that hashtag and the arrests and government persecution that spawned it, I wanted to delve deeper. Multiple revolutionary movements, from the women's movement of the 1970s to hip-hop to the Arab Spring, have begun in search of safe spaces for dancing, and the authorities have often cracked down. So as I say, the initial inspiration for this investigation was my chance encounter with that video of dance by a woman on the roof of a car who eventually unwinds her hijab, uploaded by Lisa Daftari in 2014 and since disappeared and then reappeared, and obviously shot with a low-resolution handheld cell phone camera. That dancing struck me as intentionally defined, intentionally disruptive, and very powerful. I subsequently discovered that there's a large body of similar videos on YouTube uploaded by dancers from across the Muslim world, in which the hijab, the headscarf, conventionally associated in public contexts with conservative gender values, is occupied by the vocabulary of hip-hop dance. As I've said, dance, breaking, popping, locking, and its related styles, is an integral part of the hip-hop complex, but its appearance as an international performance of resistance, especially by young women in heavily gendered theocratic contexts, is a more recent trend. So I came to see these guerrilla videos of hijab-wearing women dancing hip-hop in public settings in Iran, for example, as resistance noise, as grit intentionally thrown into the gears of repressive governments. Hashtag dancing is not a crime. Like a lot of social media-based activism reaching back to Lower Manhattan's Occupy Wall Street in 2011, Tahrir Square in Cairo in 2012, Taksim Gezi Park in Istanbul in 2014, were all precipitated by individuals' intentional or unwitting transgressions of disputed contextual boundaries. What's public? What's private? What's male? What's female? What's heteronormative? What is hetero-non-normative? But in this particular example, there's no ambiguity about public versus private. In fact, it's precisely because the street, in the midst of traffic, is inarguably a public space. This is a temporary occupation, that space, by movement and sound, by the use of visual and sonic noise. The Islamic scholar Reina Effendi says, quote, "For a young person to feel free in the Islamic Republic of Iran, they must break the law. Holding hands in public is punishable. The sight of a woman smoking cause for arrest. Being different, whether by sexual orientation, religion, musical taste, or style of dress, is persecuted." This is the dancer Sarah Afsharian. Sarah Afsharian was arrested along with 2 other young women dancers on October 8th of 2019, and she was tried in a court presided by the head of the 28th branch of Tehran's Islamic Revolutionary Court. Those arrests of those young dancers were followed within the month by additional crackdowns on other dancers. And in the wake of those arrests, similar acts of resistance have expanded and continue to proliferate on social media, both within and beyond Iran's borders. Those pop-up actions have in fact expanded to include not only dancing but also singing, another activity prohibited for women in public spaces as well. I published this book in 2019 and moved on to other topics. But then in 2022, a new wave of repression was met by a new series of actions by young women appearing in public with their hair uncovered, and a new wave of crackdowns. It culminated with the death of a young woman in mysterious circumstances in police custody. And at that time, I knew that I needed to return to this topic. I wrote to Sarah Afsharian via the only contact I could find, offering confidential means of communicating so that perhaps she could tell me about her experience. But as of this writing, her whereabouts remain unknown. Despite the stereotypes around the image of the college ivory tower, I actually believe that scholarship in the fine arts and humanities, and the places where those two sets of discipline meet, especially when that scholarship is conscious and self-critical and reflective, can provide profound insights and can help us understand the complex world in which we live. And so I believe that the work that I do in studying and teaching and playing music makes an absolutely essential contribution to the extent and the limits of my own abilities to enhanced understanding in the world. In over 5 decades as a student and performer of a wide variety of musics, I've repeatedly had the experience of falling in love with a particular musical sound, becoming curious about the circumstances and communities from which a dance originates, beginning to learn how to operate within those performance traditions, and having that learning in turn provide me insights into how the originators think about art and sound and beauty and community and identity. I also believe that desire to make art, to be creative, is absolutely fundamental to human consciousness, and it has been for 40,000 years, since the cave paintings under Cantabria and Lascaux. To deny or devalue or criminalize that creative consciousness is to dehumanize and to violate human rights. And so I believe that understanding creative consciousness, which extends across all communities and indeed into the realm of the non-human beings with which we share this fragile planet, is an essential understanding if we're going to try to make sense of our complex and fraught past histories and to grapple together with our uncertain and scary futures. Thank you very much.